Alright, we are back. We're going to be in Acts chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. Let's dive right in. Verse 1, And Saul approved of his execution, and there arose on that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem. And they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Verse 2, Devout men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. But Saul was ravaging the church and entering house after house. He dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. Verse 4, Now those who were scattered went about preaching the word. Alright, so last week we kind of looked at this man Stephen and the wrapping up of his sermon, and what would ultimately be his death at the hands of this man Saul. Saul approved his execution. A few verses earlier would say they laid their garments down at the feet of Saul, meaning that he consented to this. So Stephen, the ultimate witness, he would be filled with the Spirit, full of power, full of just grace, and God used this man in amazing ways. So this man would just be, he would be hated for what he was saying, especially by Saul. Saul seeing this man, it would also sound like Saul knew this guy, because he was part of the synagogue of the freedmen, who were originally debating with Stephen. And Stephen, they couldn't debate against Stephen because his Holy Spirit in him. So Saul was ultimately mad at this man, very mad. He wouldn't consent to his stoning without hating his guts. Saul hated this man, and it says, Saul approved of his execution, and there arose on that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem. So really, what Stephen's death is kind of doing is ushering in this time of really persecution and hardcore persecution for these early believers. And then the verse continues, And they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Okay, so what's this saying? So these men and women, the early church, were scattered through the regions of Judea and Samaria. And a quick glance at this, you might be thinking that Satan is winning, right? We see he raises up this man, Saul, to persecute these Christians and chase them away. And he's like, if they're not in the church, they're not going to be able to help the church. That might be what Satan's thinking. He's thinking that, remember, and people divided, like when Christians are divided or there's division, things go really bad really fast. So what's happening here is he's like, okay, we're going to create division by fear. We're going to say, we're going to send these people away out of fear. But what really is happening is, we'll fast forward real quick to verse 4. Now those who scattered went about preaching the word. And what's really interesting here is, instead of these guys ultimately giving up, saying, okay, I don't want anything to do with this. We just saw Stephen get killed, and we were getting persecuted, thrown in jail left and right. We don't want this. Instead of them saying that, they're preaching the gospel. They're preaching about what Jesus did on the cross, and they're bringing it to other areas, surrounding areas, instead of just Jerusalem. So now we see the gospel spreading outwards, and we see that Satan, as hard as he tries to stop the spread of the gospel, will never be able to do that. And that is exactly what this is evidence of. Take a look at that second part of verse 1. It says, except for the apostles. And that, there's a little bit of debate, but we believe that Stephen was a Hellenist, so a Greek-speaking Jew, and we believe that what Saul was doing was he was targeting these Greek-speaking Hellenist Jews. So, because the apostles were not Greek-speaking Jews, he left them alone. He left the normal Jews alone. Like it says in verse 6, the synagogue of the freedmen would ultimately be disputing. It would say they rose up and disputed with Stephen, but they could not withstand the wisdom and the spirit with which he was speaking. Then they secretly instigated men who said, We have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and God, talking about Stephen. And they stirred up the people and the elders and the scribes, and they came upon him and seized him and brought him before the council. So we see that this synagogue of the freedmen debated Stephen. Couldn't touch him, couldn't debate with him. He was too full of the Spirit and wisdom and power. So they are now Paul is mad at this man to begin with, and these Hellenistic Jews in general he's mad at. So he's going to really channel his persecution to this specific people group because of what Stephen did. And man, can you imagine seeing someone or hearing someone say, "Father, forgive them," or not Father, but God, would you forgive them? Don't hold this sin against them. Can you imagine hearing someone say that as you're stoning them to death? Like, that would haunt you. I'm not even, like, it would haunt you. Instead of them making excuses or being like screaming in agony, they're saying, God, don't hold this sin against them. Like, that to me is just mind blowing in itself. So I'd say that Saul here is very much targeting these Hellenistic Jews, and he left the apostles alone, it says. Devout men buried Stephen, and they made great lamentation over him. That's verse 2. So now people have taken Stephen's body, they are burying him, and they're mourning, making lamentation over him. And then it says, but Saul was ravaging the church. We have a couple verses. We have Philippians 3, 4 through 6, which says it this way. It says in verse 4, though I myself have reason for confidence in the flesh also. If anyone thinks he has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church, as to righteousness under the law, blameless, but whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. So we see this man, Saul, later on when he's Paul, it says he was perfect. He was a Hebrew of Hebrews. This man was zealous. He was a persecutor of the church. As to zeal, a persecutor of the church. His zeal was making him persecute the church. Our next little portion will be Galatians, and that will be chapter 1, 13 through 14. So pull that up real quick. It says in in verse 13, it says, for you have heard of my former life, received it through the, you have heard of my former life in Judaism and how I persecuted the church of God violently and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people, so extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my fathers. So he was zealous, he was ahead of his time. Most people in this stage of life weren't nearly as zealous as he was. And we just look at that, and he was persecuted the church violently and tried to destroy it. He was trying to destroy this church. Satan ultimately was trying to destroy this church. So he's ravaging the church, entering house after house, dragging off men and women, committed them to prison. So he's throwing people in prison, and he is scattering the rest. So you think this church in Jerusalem would start to suffer and struggle, but really it gets stronger, and we'll see evidence of that a little bit later on in this chapter. But we just look at this man Saul, and we get just a glimpse at this persecution he's causing. We're going to see this man make a complete 180 later on in Acts, and it's going to be a truly amazing story. So we'll get to that eventually, but for now, this man Saul, persecuting the church, killing this man Stephen, and martyring so many more, basically gets the keys to do whatever he wants to this church, and he's not doing the best. He's trying to end this church. So we'll take a look more next week. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and see you then. If you guys like this content, make sure you like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, and hopefully you can keep seeing these videos and get notified for when they come out. Thank you.